Welcome everyone. Gives me great pleasure to invite dear friend and senior journalist Veeraraghav. His talk is titled, as you know, Controlling the News Ahead of the 2019 Elections. It's truly a rare opportunity to get a media personality like him, who has worked both in electronic media and print media in senior editorial positions, to reflect critically on this extraordinarily important phenomenon of news production in India today. Please settle down. Yeah, so Veera, I'll invite you to start your talk. Thank you.
You know, we seem to be very heavy towards the right, like India is. The left is very weak. So I'm wondering if I can convince a few of my right friends to the right to shift over. You might have to go through the center first, but which may not. Or are you comfortable being there? So I get the general drift of where this country is going. Now, when Chandan called me here, I was very confident, and it was quite obvious that, from his illustrious list of friends, he couldn't find anybody else to fill this space. Here I am. Unfortunately for you, you're stuck with me in this room. I'll try and do as much damage as I possibly can. That's what journalists are supposed to do. They're supposed to do damage. Here's the deal. Before I go forward, I just wanted to check, because I believe you guys are not just people who are very highly educated, but some of you are actually planning to teach education and how to educate people outside, and you're studying that. So I just wanted to know if how many of you in this room have heard of Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's propaganda model of manufacturing consent? For the benefit of the rest of you, Noam Chomsky was a linguist who, along with Edward Herman, in the 1980s, they came up with a fascinating book, Manufacturing Consent, which is, their argument was how the mass media, and this was specifically restricted to the United States, their study, how the mass media helps manufacture consent for a particular opinion, ideology, or for the state in general, for the government in general. And the book was called Manufacturing Consent. So if you want to understand the media further, or how the media operates and why the media behaves in a particular way, and I mean the news media, it's become this term all along to use media interchangeably, because in the days that we started journalism, media meant kabhi saas bhi bahuti, and news and journalism meant NDTV and CNN, IBN, and others. But everything changed over a period of time where, once you have the biggest entertainer of them all, Arnab Goswami, on the news plant, so there's really no distinction between the two. But the news media, they studied, and they came up with 5 filters. And the 5 filters that they argued was how the big media was owned by corporations, multinational corporations, which had enormous investments in the media, and how the ownership control of the media ensured that a particular type of news cannot go out to a large degree, or that particular channel or newspaper could not take a particular stand on certain issues. While they did take those stands, but they couldn't take it easily. They had to fight the ownership battles. So it's a question of who owns your news houses. So if you're going to have a Dayanidhi Maran own your Sun network, then your news is going to be pretty much what he wants. He's not going to allow the news channel to report about how he was extremely corrupt, right? So if you have a Mukesh Ambani owning your news network, he's not going to, that network is not going to question Reliance or certain government policies which may be favorable to Reliance. So ownership was one filter. I'm just juxtaposing it to the Indian example. They came up with other filters which included advertising basically because that was the source of revenue and where the advertiser wants to put his money, which was the only way newspapers and news television networks could make money. then, so if you were to go against the interests of the advertisers, which are usually large multinational corporations, or the government itself, if you're going against them, your revenues dip. So that way, the one who holds the money for paying advertisement, or for putting in advertisements, has the ability to control what news comes out. Then you have ideology. In those days, Chomsky and Herman argued that to be anti-communism, that is, what they used as an ideology is, you might have heard of the blacklist, you might have heard of other things, where anyone who expressed an ideology that was, or questioned the state, or expressed anything that was, that could be ideologically associated with communism, was considered somebody who was a Soviet agent, or somebody who was against the interests of the United States. So you couldn't express it. Pretty much here, when you express something, when you question a particular political ideology, you're branded either secular, or there will be trolls on Twitter who will get onto you, and you will be branded anti-national if, for instance, you were to question, let's say, the surgical strikes or the Indian Army, or whether Pakistan, what's happening in Pakistan. If you reflect that from a particular point of view, which can threaten a particular political establishment here, you might be branded, anti-national. So that's ideology. Flak is, of course, sedition, defamation cases, and how the rich and powerful can control your news. So these were and news sourcing, which is purely who has the ability to reach the journalist and give him information, give him or her information that they can put out. So these were the 5 filters that Chomsky and Herman came up, and that's just, a brief prelude to you on which are the pressures that operate on, let's say, mass media network. Now we just, we move into the Indian context. Today, the news, if you have checked the news, if you've checked the Wire or the Scroll, you have the story of how 2 ABP journalists, senior editors, were asked to move out of ABP because they reported on a woman at a Narendra Modi rally who had reportedly said that, she was doing very well, and later they went and met her, and they found out that she wasn't actually doing very well. They reported this, they exposed how she was tutored to speak in a particular way at a Narendra Modi rally. At least that's allegedly the reason why these 2 senior editors were asked to leave. A few weeks ago, you had the Cobra posting operation, which exposed how a particular ideological group could manipulate news organizations or big media owners to project a particular political ideology in return for revenues from advertisement, or revenues that they're willing to pump in. But when you heard of the Cobra posting, did you just look back and find out why none of the mainstream media newspapers ever reported that sting? Everybody argued that sting operations are illegal, are unethical, not illegal, are unethical, and hid behind that garb. But no one really championed the issue that was raised by Cobra Post. None of the main news organizations or your newspapers did not have it in the front page as their headline. The reason is that everyone is complicit in this story. Now, before that, you had the Jai Shah story that was broken by the Wire, which had challenged the business model of Jai Shah, accusing or pointing fingers at BJP President Amit Shah's son, having made enormous money over the period of time. But none of the mainstream media outlets ever picked that issue up. Now, is it because media is not interested in corruption? Just go back another 5 years. What led to the national campaign against corruption that came up? It was the 2G scam, and how the media behaved when the 2G scam happened. There was an extreme desire to get A. Raja to jail, to get Kanimuri to jail. So it's not as if the media or the news organizations are not interested in corruption as an issue. It's a question of who the corrupt person is. News organizations went after Suresh Kalmadi in the Commonwealth Games scam. One of the reasons why the UPA-2 government fell was because there was an enormous campaign, an enormous impression that was created in the society that this was a very corrupt, inefficient government. And media organizations questioned Manmohan Singh for not speaking to the media. They had questioned the 2G scam severely. They'd questioned CWG. They'd questioned all kinds of problems that the UPA government was facing. and very severely anti-establishment. They were willing to question the central government very seriously. Now, why has that not happened now? You've had a section of the press, and obviously anyone who questions is termed to be belonging to a particular ideological group. You didn't term at that point of time, and I'm speaking before 2014, you didn't term those who questioned UPA government as people from the right wing. You termed them as people who were concerned about India and who were concerned about corruption and who were going to challenge the government on it. But now, anyone, whether it is the Rafale deal, whether it is the Jai Shah case, whether it is the Cobra posting, which doesn't relate with the government technically, it relates more with the media itself and how the media is run, is not willing to question it. Now, why has this happened? And you know, this is the problem that we face in the present day context. There are two very pertinent issues. One is the desire not to question, or the desire not to go beyond a particular point to challenge a government. Maybe they are not corrupt. I'm not drawing a conclusion here, but the way you went after one, you're not going after the other in terms of a particular issues. And the second is the polarization that's come into the media, where you have set standards, you have a set opinion that's been, a description that's given to a particular news anchor or to a particular news organization on which side of the divide they belong. Do they belong to the right or do they belong to the left? Now, if you belong to the right, you won't question any of these issues, and if you belong to the left, you're only questioning these issues. So the journalist's credibility comes under a stake. If you have a particular journalist, and I want to avoid taking names at this stage, but if you have one particular journalist who is questioning a particular government policy, then he is branded as being left of center. And if you have a journalist who's willing to speak in favor of the government, if that same journalist speaks in favor of the government, he is branded right of center. Now, a journalist's job is not to take stands which are based on the political establishment. The journalist's job is to take stands based on the facts in front of him and the issue that's in front of him. A person who supports Narendra Modi today on a particular policy issue might be allowed to differ from him on another policy issue. Might have to and that's the very essence of journalism. So newspapers, while they could be anti-establishment, or they could take a political stand on a particular context, they cannot be branded, whatever they say cannot be branded as being right or left. And in that garb, what happens is that the credibility of any claim that you make with any amount of facts becomes tarnished by the ideological narrative that's been given to you. So which means that you have already chosen your stand on where you want to be. You have chosen yourselves to be at the right of center. They've chosen themselves to be at the left of center. So no matter what I say about the right, you will see me through the prism of being someone coming from the left of center, only willing to attack you because of your political ideology, not because of the actions that you've committed. I'm questioning you only because of your political ideology. Now, if you were to give them a communication about something good that the right has done, it would be seen as, you know, this is a person who's been bought over by Narendra Modi or the BJP. Which means that there is no communication between the two sides. You're living in your own little cocoons. You're not willing to engage in dialogue. There is no dialogue, which means that for newspapers or news organizations to take a stand on a particular issue becomes that much more severe, because the editor or the journalist is accused of representing a political ideology and not facts or information that he is willing to expose on a particular story. Take, for example, this ABP issue. Look at the Wire. Look at the Scroll. They're the news organization, news websites which have put out the story of the ABP journalists coming out. Now, in your mind, immediately, Wire and the Scroll belong to the left. India, let's say, has an enormously successful operation in Jammu and Kashmir. If Arnab Goswami goes around hailing Jammu and Kashmir and Indian government stand on Jammu and Kashmir, you don't want to know the facts. You are immediately convinced that Arnab Goswami is right of center, which means that there is no objective view of what's happened. Now, how did we get here? As fate would have it, I mean, and this is purely from my own observation, and I'm not, I think a few things happened over the last 10 years which has got us here. And towards the conclusion, I will look at how you will see this increase further as we head into 2019 elections, and why it will increase further. Now, one of the first things that, to me, at least to my mind, the turning point was this moment, and I don't know if you all remember this. You know what this is. I'm glad you all remember. But, this led to this, to a large extent. And I'm just going to try and explain to you why. And this is one parallel of the story on how journalists changed over a period of time. Because at one point of time, the national faces of journalism, the people who were most watched, at least in the English news networks, and I'm taking television as the first example, English news networks were people who were left liberal, people who challenged. The earlier stars were Rajdeep Sardesai and Barkha Dutt, who were people who grew to fame by challenging right-wing, by challenging communal violence, by taking a very strong left liberal approach. Now, what happens in 2611 is that at that time there were 3 English news channels, 4 actually, but 3 which were main. One was NDTV, the other was CNN IBN, and the third was Times Now. How many of you know that Arnab Goswami, Barkha Dutt, and Rajdeep Sardesai all worked together in NDTV at one point of time? They all worked together. We were all colleagues at that point of time. Now, what happens is that until 2611, CNN, IBN, and NDTV are fighting for the #1 space. Times Now is a little down. Times Now doesn't have the kind of viewerships that it has. Now, what happens with 2611 was that it was an event that none of us have ever seen before. It was a 48-hour terror drama that was unfolding right in front of your eyes, a tragedy that was unfolding minute after minute. And that was ideal for 24/7 news networks. Think about it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to think of any other content. You are focused on this for 48 hours. Now, the other thing that happened was that it was happening out of Bombay. Now, all the national news networks were based out of Delhi. Times Now was based out of Bombay. All right? Now, what happens is that their coverage, and with Arnab Goswami in the studio for 48 hours, results in a situation where their viewerships increase, and a channel that was struggling until that point of time to make a mark, to beat the competition, becomes #1 at 2611. Now, what it also did at that point of time is that, we are so socio-economically divided that when a terror attack happens in Kashmir, we're not outraged. But when corporate India was under stake, when the people who were under attack were people who would visit those places, it really took a huge dent on the image and the psyche of Bombay's rich and elite. And what happens is that slowly there was a sense of outrage. Obviously there was a sense of outrage and anger, but the studio turns into a place where that outrage and anger gets an expression, all right? Now, the reason why I'm giving you this example is because at some level, once somebody passes a particular barrier and that's acceptable in society, then everybody tries to follow it, right? Once somebody does something that's interesting and they're able to breach a barrier. So what was it that you got? You slowly started the nation wants to know. You had the anchor as the expression of the outrage of the society. It starts off that way, and slowly it starts building up. You had the anchor as the judge, jury, and the executioner, and you had talk shows which would decide which way a particular debate has to go. Now, before this, and around that time, what used to happen is that, let's say if you have a debate about a particular issue, you would have 2 or 3 points of view. You would have 2 or 3 panelists who would give their points of view. Now, on certain issues, the channel would have its own point of view and would argue. You would know the journalist's leanings at that point of time, ideologically. But when you had a debate, it was supposed to be a sensible exchange of points of view on both sides. The anchor as a person was supposed to be neutral. As a journalist, you were supposed to be neutral. You're not supposed to force a point of view. Now, what happens with this outrage and this journalism is that the anchor has already taken a particular point of view even before a show begins. And this is not about one individual. This man may have led the pack and started it, but the anchor has already defined a particular point of view, all right? Now he's got guests. Like, for instance, you know, you have those puppets in Ornab's show in Pakistan, from Pakistan. I don't know how much they get paid to just sit down there. It's like, you know, they just get bashed. They're constantly getting bashed. And this is not about outrage, it's outrageous. I wouldn't know why someone would want to come onto that show, because they don't get to speak. You're constantly getting bashed. So when you have that, and that's not just in one news channel, everybody else wants to follow that same yardstick. That's because the anchor, as a person, realized that this is what the people want, or assumed that this is what the people want. Why was that? Because after 26/11, once the TRP started growing up, Times of India, as a business group, and Times Now, realized that there was a need for a right of center English news network. Everybody was left liberal. You needed a right of center English news network, and they openly started propagating that particular point of view, where the anchor would get outraged whether it is a 2G scam, where the anchor could just lift up this pen and say that I have documents against the government. You had that kind of dramatics that worked out, and it really helped, you know, push the channel's viewership ahead. Once that started happening, they become the successful networks. You slowly have a situation where others are subtly following this, the kind of outrage journalism. And at that point of time, India was not as divided left-right as we are today. Now, as this is happening on the one hand, and then you had the 2009 Lok Sabha elections, where the BJP projected L.K. Advani, the Congress comes back to power, UPA comes back to power, you have anti-incumbency against a two-time government that's building up, and at the same time, you have this outrage journalism that starts off, which starts having, you know, a resonance with the people. Obviously, there was frustration. There was a feeling that there was a lot of corruption. It starts with corruption. It doesn't start with an ideological position. If you go back and see around 2010-11, nobody would blame Ornab of being right of center at that point of time. Even Times Now was not considered right of center. It was considered an anti-establishment news network. But slowly, as this happens, parallelly, another thing happens, which is that for the first time, you have a multinational corporation, Reliance, I mean, you know, India's biggest corporate house, beginning to take stake in a large news network. Now, that's primarily because in India, we never had any restriction on who can own a news network. You never had any restrictions on ownership, like is there in many different parts of the world. A country like UK has serious restrictions on ownership. In India, we never had restrictions on ownership, and you slowly have this corporate house which loans money and slowly begins to take over Network 18, which was a very large media conglomerate. Once that happens, and the final takeover happens post 2014, that's after the BJP comes to power. Now, once that happens, you have serious questions raised of who can own media houses. Now, just look at how the ownership pattern in the Indian media is. All your mainstream media, and Chomsky and Herman define two things. One is the dominant media, which I'll refer to as the mainstream media. Another is the fringe media outlets. Now, you might have an online publication or a small newspaper which has very good ownership values, which has very good ethics, but does it dominate? Does it control the public opinion, or at least have a greater say in public opinion than the dominant media? No. So we're talking of large news networks which have an enormous readership, enormous influence in molding public opinion, all right? So in those media networks, if you look at it, you would have 5 or 6 families and a few corporations own those media networks. It would either be closely held family ownership, or it would be a corporate heavyweight, or it would be a large political party. And that's happened at the regional media space as well. When you look at, if you turn around and look at Karnataka in terms of your, in the Kannada news space, or in the English news, or in the television, Kannada television space, you will see that most of the owners are either powerful businessmen with political links, or they are, or it will be closely held family ownership. Now, what happens in a closely held family ownership? You don't know who is invested how. If you take a big media house with, let's say, 3 family members or 4 family members, which is not a public listed company, you have no idea of knowing which corporations have invested through which sources into that particular business. Number 2, when you have a big corporation which is owning the house, or owning a media house, you obviously have, it's pretty clear that that particular media organization is not going to be able to report or reveal information that can be detrimental to that corporate house. Now, when a political party is owning a house, or a politician is owning a media house, obviously you're not going to go beyond a particular point on taking on that particular politician or that particular political party, and you're going to use your media network to fuel or foster agenda for that particular politician, right? So why is that even more important? Because today none of the major media outlets are actually making any money. All of them are in the red in terms of their bottom line, because of, for newspapers, the rising cost of newsprint. For television networks, advertising has been at a low. So media news networks are not considered a very profitable business venture. The only reason why someone would invest thousands of crores into a particular news organization, or starting a news organization, is because they have other gains that come out of owning a news corporation. Or somebody who's genuinely interested in the betterment of society and wants to launch a news network, and I haven't seen that happen so far. So you've got this triggers off the debate over ownership patterns. This is still 2014. Now, what happens after that? Even after this, you still do not have any ownership restrictions in the Indian news in the Indian news media space. Now, why would you need restrictions? There are 2 things that are happening. One is known as horizontal integration, the other is known as vertical integration. If you take the case of Bangalore, you have the Times of India, you have the Bangalore Mirror, you have Times FM, you have Times Now, you have Mirror Now. All right? Now, these are 5 large news agencies, newspapers, or television networks which are owned by one corporate house. All right? So just look at the stranglehold that that particular corporate house has over the audience here. If you're talking of an audience of 60 lakh, and let's say you have a 30% viewership for Times Now, you have a 20% viewership for Mirror Now, 50% of that 60 lakh people are actually listening, are forming their opinions based on what this corporate house wants them to form their opinions to. And look at how it operates as well. Times Now is considered right of center because that's battling Republic TV. It's so right that it's virtually fallen off the map. Then you have Mirror Now, which is considered left of center. So look at the corporate business model. It's to create a news network to cater to a particular ideological group, and all of it comes from one corporate house. Now you'll have that. You'll have Reliance, which will control CNBC TV 18 as a listed company in the stock markets. Think about the ability and the control it would have when you have a business news network that can affect the Sensex or the stock prices. If you put out a particular story on CNBC TV 18, it has an impact on the stock markets. Now, Reliance as a company has enormous investments in the stock market as well. Look at the stranglehold that they'll have. They have CNN News 18, You'll have ETV network at regional levels which completely control, which have a large say in some states. You have, and now the talk is that the next thing they want to do is to turn First Post into a newspaper, which is the general market buzz at the moment. So before the 2019 elections, they will also have a newspaper, all right? Now, when you look at the UK, for instance, as an example, there's something called Ofcom that regulates ownership. Now, how have they done that? They've said that no one who owns stake in a news channel which has more than 20% viewership nationally can also own stake in a news network, in a newspaper that has more than 20% readership nationally. Why have they implemented that? Because to ensure plurality of views, that you are not getting your news only from one corporation, that there is neither a monopoly or an oligopoly that exists within the news space as a public good. Now, why did we come down to this level? Because we had Doordarshan as an idea of a public service broadcaster. Instead, it turned into a state-run broadcaster. It was funded purely by the state, and it had to go by, and when you say state, it had to listen to the political establishment in power. So Doordarshan will have a bureaucrat sitting as the chairman of Prasar Bharat. And now, there was an effort in the mid-1990s to try and make Doordarshan run more professionally, make it, in a sense, a public service broadcaster. That hasn't happened. So in the absence of a public service broadcaster, your news is coming, all that you know, whether whether you decide Modi is Feku or Rahul Gandhi is Pappu, is controlled by a few corporations which control the news network. Online can change that space, but can it beat the dominant media? You may be, reading The Wire and finding news from The Wire, but how many people are actually getting that information from The Wire? And can The Wire compete if the propaganda is coming out of big corporations and large newspapers to a large extent? Can The Wire compete in fighting that out, or should it? Just as an example, and not glorifying The Wire or saying that the rest of them are idiots. But the threat is, and I'm not saying that this has happened, the threat is that when you allow such an oligopoly or a monopoly to control your news gathering or news disseminating process, this is the next round. That's why a few days ago, even this will not be questioned. There was a private company which is launching a product, and you had the Prime Minister's, it became a controversy. You had the Prime Minister's face. The Prime Minister was virtually endorsing a product of a private company. And about 3 days ago, if you take the Hindu, it was there on the front page. The Prime Minister said, I don't mind being seen with corporates. Well, it doesn't matter whether you mind or not. It's a question of whether we mind you being with corporates. But unfortunately, he doesn't mind, and we're okay with it. He's already been on the face endorsing a particular corporate's product, so obviously he doesn't mind being with corporates. He's been with corporates all along. But you have a situation where, but why would they want to be on the right side of the corporates? You have to be on the right side of the corporate house, because the corporate house and the government, they all control the media very well. They're the ones who can stand up to what the establishment does. So, which brings you to a situation where the ability to manufacture consent for a particular ideology or for a particular political agenda is greatly increased, and that's purely because you have no regulations on who can own and how they operate a particular news network. The flip side, and the third side that's happening in terms of newspapers, is the price of a particular newspaper, the price of newsprint and the cost of running a newspaper, and hence the profitability of having a newspaper house, even for established players, is becoming extremely difficult. People are finding it difficult to cut costs and yet maintain quality. They are heavily dependent on advertisements for revenue. about 90-95%. That's because even the few who have read the Jay Shah story on the wire, I'm sure would not have contributed 5 rupees to the wire. You will still want your newspaper at a price of 5 rupees or 7 rupees. If the price of the newspaper is increased to 30 rupees, you will shift to toilet paper, right? So, you know, when it comes down to when it comes down to the audience and the unwillingness of the audience to pay or invest in news, and to recognize the fact that news in a large sense helps formulate public opinion, recognize the importance of it, and to recognize the fact that that's what you need to know. You know, that's the only way you get to know what's happening anywhere else in the world or in the country. That reluctance, coupled with the fact that there is a huge corporate agenda that's on for themselves, for their own good, from the fact that news networks have to make some kind of money. News organizations are a business entity at the end of the day. They are there for profit. They are not there on a public service motive, though public service is something that is at the core of journalism. News organizations per se will have to work on a business model which gives them some kind of profit and financial returns. Now, in this context, when you have it, and as we head with this into 2019 elections, you will have a situation where you will see slowly that a lot of stuff will become more polarized. You will see that a particular set of news and public opinion, there will be an effort to formulate public opinion. Yesterday I read in the papers that the government wants to take online news and data control very seriously, which is why the reason why they want to take data control and online very seriously is primarily, and the reason why from Trump down the line there is a great concern about fake news is purely because online is a space that's completely unrestricted and can reach without much of Chomsky's filters, because ownership patterns, or, you know, investments are less, their reach is enormous. So ahead of the elections, you will see a lot of these things happening. But if you look at how the mainstream media would behave, even those who want to be objective will have to do so under tremendous pressure from ownership, from their owners, from the business side of the organizations, and from the fear of being seen as representing one particular point of view or the other. So in a polarized environment, it becomes easier when you do not have, when you have a news organization which works without restrictions or controls. And often whenever you take this issue of regulation of news to journalists, they often argue back to you saying, no, that will be a curb on freedom of expression, that will be censorship at some level. But then we need to find some way, whether it is self-regulation, whether it is a sense of, you know, a constitutional body, a quasi-judicial body, I don't know, some form that can control and regulate the patterns of ownership, those who are putting in money through advertising, those who are, and the kind of journalism that's being practiced. What happens when a fake story is put out? What happens when a particular news organization actively colludes with a particular political ideology or a particular political party to put out news that can create, that can manufacture consent for it? I think there needs to be regulators at some level, and we're still struggling with that question. In the absence of it, and in the absence of that kind of regulators, as you get into an explosive online election campaign, you will see that there will be many things that will come up which will dumb down the debate, which will make it less sensible, because that helps, you know, that helps nourish you know, one side or the other. So So the simple point and the only objective that I had when I wanted to share this with you is purely to state that there are serious issues which are behind the scenes which the media faces. So while one may judge news organizations on what you see on screen, and one may have serious problems with how it operates, the trouble is two ways. One is from the side of the news organizations and where they are going, and on the other side, the reader engagement and involvement in terms of seriousness with which they challenge or question the news that they read, and how they approach news itself. If you're going to be opinionated and if you're already going to have a bias, then you're only going to take one side of the story. And that's what news organizations are using to their advantage. They're launching channels or making news programs which feeds into a person's bias, thereby strengthening that particular bias. Because if they're challenging your bias, you're immediately not their viewer anymore. You have multiple options to shift over to someone who's willing to feed more into your bias. So when you go into 2019 elections, and you know, I suspect that many of you will also be people that would be targeted for your votes at one point of time. I think it's important to understand that there is going to be a situation where increasingly there will be one side or the other with really no clear factual information that comes out in front of you. And that campaign is going to get further strengthened, primarily because elections to a large extent are an enormous money-making exercise for news organizations. Otherwise, you know, you have a pre-poll, you have a post-poll, you have a midterm poll, you have so many polls. Have you ever wondered why a news organization would want to spend so much money in putting out so many polls and poll discussions? It's purely because news, you never know when 26/11 can happen. So I can't tell you, the advertiser, if you're the advertiser, I can't tell you, boss, tomorrow morning 26/11 is happening, the ad rates are going to go up. I can't do that. But when I put a post poll, I can tell you that tomorrow we're trying to make a prediction on whether it's going to be Feku or Papu. And you know that you will get the eyeballs. And at that time, the advertiser will come down. So for election season, there will be a lot of opinion polls. There will be a lot of pre-polls that will come in. Despite the fact that they've got it wrong in the past, in some occasions, they've got it right in many occasions. 50-50 chance. It's like pretty much the game, you know, the gambling game. You know, I said this, and you know, then on the morning of the results, you can always go down and say that I was right, because no one's going to go back and check what you said earlier. So you will have a lot of these things that are happening, and through that, I think if you look closely, you will realize how, while a particular side, even which is challenging the establishment, may question a particular political ideology, they will not question, or they would be very worried or wary about going beyond a particular point in questioning substantial issues of, let's say, corruption, of development, of actual debate on economic issues that face the people, poll spending, you know, cronyism, links with corporate groups, because these are things that that become you know, we can't holier than thou. We can't touch those particular things. We can, to establish myself as somebody who is who belongs to your particular bias, I might come out and say that, you know, I'm left of center, or I will try and question lynching. I will try and question a particular communal ideology, which is important to question. But along with the questioning of a particular communal ideology, or propagating a particular communal ideology, I think there needs to be a substantive debate on economic issues, and where were the promises, what were the promises that were given, what has been delivered. Can we have a factual analysis of where we are? And based on that, decide on whether a government has performed or not performed. And whether there were illegal activities that were committed, whether there were criminal issues that were, you know, should there be some kind of action that was initiated. This is, you know, these, For instance, in the Jai Shah case, and after the Jai Shah case, nothing has happened. There has been no report, there has been no, except defamation cases. You post the Cobra posting, nothing really tangible has happened. And this is primarily because we have no regulatory framework whatsoever. You have a Press Council of India which could not, I don't know if many of you know this, there was a report on paid news that was prepared by journalists. The Press Council of India could not even put it out because it was under pressure from newspaper owners to turn around and say, don't put this report out. So there is no guideline for advertisements. The television channels in India are now governed by what is known as the National Broadcasting Authority, which is a self-regulatory body that was created by television owners. Now, the only punishment that NBA can give you is please leave the room. Now, you'll be more than happy. I mean, I couldn't care less if I have to leave this organization and I'm out. A person who left the room will later come back and become the president of the NBA. So these are self-regulatory bodies. Press Council of India is the only other thing, which is not from the government. So the primary regulator ultimately is the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, which gives licenses. Without the Information Broadcasting Ministry's license, no one can come up with a television network. They cannot, they will not be registered as a newspaper. So the Information and Broadcasting Ministry controls how newspapers and news organizations operate in this country. And despite the emergency, despite years where press freedom has come under threat, we have not formed a strong regulatory body that can ensure, that can support the press, regulate it from itself and its flaws and business exercises, and also protect it from the government. So that's really where we stand. And this is why you will have a repeat of everything all over and over again as you head into 2019. I don't know if I've stuck to the topic of how this is going to sort of manifest itself in 2019, because I think that's a bit of a prediction. But the effort was to try and give you a background to how we got here over the last 10 years. Yeah. We have half an hour left. Right? So yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah. Oh, Mike. No, but you can talk. I can hear you. Oh.
Sir, I want to ask, who is exactly setting the agenda? It is means online media, WhatsApp, etc., or it's a big news organization which are setting the agenda? Because this penetration of this online media is much more than the big media organization. Everybody is having WhatsApp.
But the big media is there online as well.
But already means the message which IT cell and all they are creating are reaching much before than big media is picking them. So already agenda is getting setted. Big media is just discussing or debating on the agenda which already been setted by.
So here's the difference. When you get something from online, you do not know the source of the information. So you want to validate it. You see, people don't form their opinions just by hearing something. You want validation for that particular point that has been given to you. The validation happens from the big media. While you may have received the information, let's say there is a flood somewhere else. There is a flood on down the road in Hosur. If you get a WhatsApp message saying there is a flood in Hosur, you will immediately turn to news channels to check whether there is a flood there. That same way, if somebody gives you some information, if I've given you some information on a particular news report, you would immediately go into validation with the big media. And that's where it matters, big media or the media that you trust. Now, small news organizations which exist, which are online publications or small enterprises, do not have the ability to constantly give you, 24/7 news. It's big news organizations with enormous investments that can give you news as it happens and constantly keep feeding you news. Now, they are the ones you will turn to validate. If, let us say, let's say somebody tells you that there was a lot of corruption in the Rafale deal. All right? How do you know that there was a lot of corruption in the Rafale deal? Let's say you get a WhatsApp from a Congress guy who puts out details of a particular thing. Unless it's validated by many other people, you're not going to really believe the Congress guy for putting that information out.
Now, laymen in means small cities and villages, they really do consider that they need to validate their information or not. They just means we have seen cases of mob lynching just because they have believed what is coming in their WhatsApp.
You're talking of the lynching cases.
Lynching,
whether it is happening. No, but the fact that lynching, you see, that's the panic reaction that one has set through. That's the flip side of the, I'm talking of a different issue when it comes to your electoral choice. I'm looking at that. Now, rumor mongering is a problem with WhatsApp and, your social media, is a huge problem with that. Now, rumor mongering can happen, which is why you have a serious issue of fake news which are being circulated. People can send out, recently there was an incident in Karnataka where a particular person put out that a Jain monk was hit by a car driven by a Muslim, and then that resulted in a major issue and he was arrested. So, spreading of fake news, you have to see it at different levels. If a particular lynching case has happened, now I'm not talking of one particular village getting together for that, on that particular issue. I'm talking of, is it wrong that it has happened? Why has it happened? Who is going to stop it? I mean, can I do something about it from happening? Now, for it to become a large national issue, you need the mainstream media to pick it up. Whether it is the Kathua case, whether it is the Unnao case, it becomes a massive issue only when big media picks it up and starts creating a national campaign on it. Individually, there could be local issues where people may get to know on the basis of, if let's say an NRC, an issue of, on the NRC or an issue on surgical strikes, on any of these issues, your only information comes from either these sources where somebody puts out a message which you would like to validate from the big media. That's what I'm talking about.
Sorry, I want to just one clarification. Okay. You say that, I just want to know that is this WhatsApp and all these messages, are they not acting as a big media organization in itself because their agenda is setting?
But they're anonymous. But they're anonymous.
Because it is means controlled by a central location.
No, you are talking of an IT cell of a political party putting out information, right?
Yeah.
Now, an IT cell of a political party, like for instance, there is a particular guy in the Congress who sends me messages at least 20 times in a day with exactly what changes have happened in the party and all those things. That is the IT cell. Now, putting out Rahul Gandhi's tweet, putting out this one. So you do have direct access to what has happened in that process, right? Like let's say somebody, if the Congress guy puts out a video of a Narendra Modi rally with empty chairs and says that, there is nobody to attend the Narendra Modi rally, you will have that video in front of you. But you are also getting the BJP IT cell chap putting out the information. When it comes to deciding on your opinion, and you look closely at your own behavior, you will realize that you will want to somewhere see it on a newspaper or on a news channel. If that particular issue is picked up and that point that you've had is reiterated, then it becomes a strong opinion in your mind. I'm not saying that, what has changed is that big media is no longer the news breakers. They are not the first source of information for the reader. But because they are not the first source of information for the reader, which is why their objective has shifted from being informers to being opinion makers. So they will, the news debate that you watch on TV at 9 o'clock or you watch on your video does not give you any information about a particular issue. What it does is to reiterate and firm up your opinion on that particular issue based on how the news anchor or the news organization sees that particular issue. Do you get the difference between the two? You might get the information, but your validation still happens through big media. Or at least big media has a huge say in your validation. If, let us say, you get information from the Congress guy and all the news channels are reporting that it's a wrong, it's fake and it's not true, who would you believe? Would you believe the WhatsApp message or would you believe all the news organizations putting it out? So that's where.
I'll share two events and then I'll come to the question.
No, you have to ask.
No, just to also put in a red herring to everyone. See, it's not like totally black. I'm not putting out a picture that it's totally black and it's really awful. You know, there are good sides. There is good journalism as well. But good journalism is increasingly becoming a strenuous exercise. And there are good newspapers. I choose not to name one or two because there could be a lot of them which are good. And a corporate house might do good journalism as well. So my only point is that you're exposed to a situation where it's controlled by a few players. And that's not healthy in a democratic process where, you know, news ensures public opinion is formulated for or against a particular side.
Okay, because I
the
said
question straight.
No, the
We have
thing
only
is
20 minutes. We have only 20
okay,
minutes.
fine. So two events. First, it was an interesting one. In Delhi Metro, when I was traveling, I overheard 5 to 6 people talking about how they perceive news. So it was like between Rohit Sardana and Sudhir Chaudhary. So they were saying that Rohit Sardana को हम ज़्यादा पसंद करते हैं क्योंकि वो प्रोपेगेंडा या फिर ओपिनियन बना रहे, बल्कि पर सुधीर को इसलिए नहीं पसंद करते क्योंकि वो थोड़ा सा इंफॉर्मेशन या एजुकेशनल चीज़ें बताने लगते हैं डीएनए में. सो इट इज़ इन इटसेल्फ कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी. राइट के ही वो दोनों लोग हैं बट स्टिल उसमें भी चॉइस है कि रोहित सरदाना पहले फिर सुधीर चौधरी. ऑन दी अदर हैंड जब जज लोया का केस हुआ था उसमें कारवा मैगजीन ने जब इन्वेस्टिगेशन करके उसको पब्लिश किया, उसके एक हफ्ते बाद इंडियन एक्सप्रेस, जो कि आप बोल रहे थे लेफ्ट लिबरल्स और इस्टेब्लिशमेंट को क्वेश्चन करने के लिए 90s का इंडियन एक्सप्रेस बहुत खतरनाक था, अब वो एक हफ्ते बाद उल्टी सारी इन्वेस्टिगेशन लाके पब्लिश करते हैं. तो एक पार्ट हो गया रेगुलेशन का जहाँ पे अमित शाह या
इंडियन एक्सप्रेस ने क्या गलत किया?
उन्होंने जिस तरीके से इन्वेस्टिगेट करके लाया
तो देखिए हर एक स्टोरी में दो तरफ का इंफॉर्मेशन आता है.
ठीक है.
तो देखिए कोई एक स्टोरी छापा है, कैरावन मैगजीन एक स्टोरी छापा है, तो इंडियन एक्सप्रेस ने कुछ गलत नहीं किया. वो स्टोरी को चैलेंज करके उनके पास जो इन्फॉर्मेशन है उस हिसाब से उन्होंने चैलेंज किया. यही बात मैं बोल रहा हूँ कि ये इसमें आप कैरावन को लेफ्ट और इंडियन एक्सप्रेस को राइट मत देखिएगा.
नहीं, हाँ, मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि आपने दो बातें की थी, एक जिसमें व्यूअर और रीडर अपना परसेप्शन बनाता है, तो वो हो गई एक अवेयरनेस क्रिएट करने वाली बात, और दूसरा हो गया जहाँ पे आप रेगुलेटरी बॉडी की बात कर रहे हैं, सेल्फ रेगुलेशन और एक इंडिपेंडेंट रेगुलेटरी बॉडी. तो दोनों इंस्टेंसेस में एक में अवेयरनेस वाला पार्ट ज़्यादा है, दूसरे में रेगुलेशन वाला पार्ट ज़्यादा है. और बीच में ही आपने एक और बात कही थी कि एक न्यूज़ फर्म या न्यूज़ चैनल अभी तक कोई नहीं लाया है जो कि समाज सुधारने के लिए लाएगा. तो दोनों में से आप क्या चाहेंगे, जो भी अगर नया न्यूज़ फर्म खोले टू ब्रिंग अबाउट अ सोशल चेंज, उसमें अवेयरनेस और रेगुलेशन दोनों साथ साथ चलना चाहिए या फिर
हाउ कैन अवेयरनेस बी विदाउट फॉर दोज हु डोंट जस्ट टू I'm sure there are those who don't understand Hindi. I mean, is there anyone who doesn't follow Hindi? So
quite a few, I think.
Yeah, quite a few. So the question is very simple. He's asking me whether I think anyway, I won't get into that debate. This is a debate. My wife is from UP. And I constantly have this debate that whenever North Indians start speaking, they will suddenly branch into Hindi, assuming everybody understands Hindi. If I am talking and I suddenly branch into Tamil or Kannada while talking to, if I go off into Kannada, many people. No. So this is my story, personal story. So when you started speaking in Hindi and I responded in Hindi, I realized that my conversation went back to my wife. Where I have to remind her that look, there could be people who come to meet me who don't understand Hindi. So yeah, anyway, so it's but it's not for any linguistic chauvinism. But his question is that should awareness, and correct me if I'm wrong, his question is that when you talk of regulation, when you talk of a new news setup, do you need to have which is more important, awareness or regulation, or do you need both? I think regulation is not possible without awareness. All right. Regulation is important to see how news networks control it. Awareness is important about yourself and your own biases and the opinion that you have, which at the audience level, I think reader engagement and awareness is extremely important, because part of the problems, and I do agree to a lot of people who say you know, in a democracy, just as you get the government you deserve, you will get the news anchor you deserve. You all deserve Arnab Goswami, it's not my fault. So, you know, it works that way, right? So, you know, you want that kind of news, you want noise, that's what you will get. Because, you know, if you're going to put out a particular news in a particular format, in a particular style, which reiterates opinion, which is happening around the world, and it's not just happening in India, it's happening around the world. If you take, for instance, if you take the US, you know, the kind of, if you see the late night shows, talk shows, they're just hilarious on how they take on Trump. But then amongst the late night anchors, there is a clear Fox which is right of center, there is a clear CNN which is left of center, left of Trump, which is against Trump, Fox is for Trump. Now, the point is that both Fox and CNN will be the same when it comes to a war on Iraq. They will do chest thumping when it comes to a war on Iraq. They will believe in American, this one first. But when it comes internally, there is, all I'm trying to say is that you can express something, you can make fun of the president, and you're not going to be you're not going to jail, or you're not going to lose your job. So the problem is that here it has come to a situation where if you're willing to challenge a particular point of view beyond a particular point, you know, there is serious retribution. So you need to have freedom to express both. The audience need to be aware to pick which side they want to do, they have to listen to both sides. But regulation is important and protection is important, and regulation along with protection is important to ensure there is plurality of views. That one person, that there could be 5 newspapers, there has to be 5 different people holding newspapers here, or at least break it up into different companies. No, so that's the.
Hello, sir. Here, from back.
We'll collect a few questions once.
No, we'll go with okay. Yeah. So last one.
3 questions. No. We'll ask questions to you first.
You were already asleep during the talk, so it's okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay with what?
He was yawning.
Okay. I'm Shabrinathan from MA Education. I have 3 simple questions, sir. Very simple questions.
3?
Yeah. But you don't need to fear. It's a simple questions.
One from right, one from left, one from
Neutrality. Yeah. First question is, you reported 2009 Sri Lankan war. Just what kind of politics played behind that war? Just I want to know, because most of the Tamilians are being killed during that battle. So what's the real politics behind that battle? Just I want to know.
What do you mean real politics?
Politics means something the Indian government.
You're a Tamilian, I see.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Where are you from?
So I'm from Tamil Nadu.
No, that I know. Where are you from?
Where are you from means?
Which part of Tamil Nadu are you?
Which part of Tamil Nadu? Okay, Erode.
Erode, you're from. Yeah. So this is where Perarivalan and all were. This guy was there, no? From Erode, what's the name of that DK activist who was very close
Veeramani at Periyar.
No. Erode is where I'm from also, so it's okay. No, Erode is where the R&AW had training camps for the LTT way back in the 70s, 80s, if you don't know.
Maybe. So the Indian governments are indirectly supported, they given some weapons to Sri Lankan army like that. That's why they kill a lot of people.
Can we do this little later? I don't think it might interest on the Sri Lankan.
I'll jump to next question.
Yeah.
Second question is very simple. That is, which Indian media, whether it's printing media or news media, they are providing the 100% true news with neutrality. Any one newspaper?
No, I don't endorse. I'm not like Narendra Modi endorsing Jio. I don't endorse any news channel. Right now I'm jobless. I need everyone to give me a job.
Okay.
So nice. once I start, after I got a job, based on the deal I get, I will endorse that particular newspaper.
Now you are maintaining
I might be working with Republic TV. I mean, so I'm a little worried about this online thing.
Okay, last question.
In case somebody gets it in the background check, I suspect nobody reads. No journalist would be intelligent enough to follow Azim Premji University. So I might escape.
Okay. Last question. Yesterday, day before yesterday.
Third. Okay.
Yeah. The last question. So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met some personality who is working in news media in Tamil Nadu. So, in the last 4.5 years, he did not meet any media people. They are heading towards the 2019 parliamentary election. Why did he meet suddenly? what's maybe the politics behind that? As you are
What is the politics? He wants to make sure, in Tamil Nadu, nobody understands Hindi.
Definitely they
first.
will not get a votes.
So,
No,
how do you know? He doesn't
Tamil
need
Nadu
to
they
get,
can't.
he doesn't need to get votes. Your Edapadi Palaniswamy is behaving like BJP state president there, so why would he bother? So, anyway.
He already sold the Tamil Nadu to Modi.
No, the BJP does have plans for Tamil Nadu. They are very serious. That's one state that they've only had a presence in Kanyakumari district. They've not had a presence in Coimbatore to an extent. But the BJP does want to build itself in this one. Why the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister, by the way, may not be speaking to journalists at a press conference, but he has been meeting editors even in Delhi. I mean, I believe that some chosen editors do get to meet the Prime Minister. Okay. So it's not as, if the Prime Minister had done a press conference in Chennai, then I think the question is valid. But otherwise, he keeps meeting editors. And when he comes to Tamil Nadu, he wants to understand. There are very few people who can speak Hindi and Tamil. So this possible editor could have been one person who speaks Hindi and Tamil and was trying to communicate, translate to him what is happening in Tamil Nadu.
Okay, that's fine.
Or he might have inquired about Karunanidhi's health. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
But you can't, it's okay for him to meet. But the BJP is on an overdrive. Every political party will be on an overdrive. You will see Rahul Gandhi will be meeting editors across the board to put their point of view. Before an election, all political parties are on an overdrive. In fact, Kumaraswamy wants to meet a lot of editors. So, a politician meeting editor is not a big deal.
Okay, I will personally meet you, ask many questions. Yeah.
So
Hello,
the question is, like, you have already said that the news channels, the debates or exaggerating incident, is they are keeping like...
Sorry?
The debates they are keeping or the exaggerating some incident is because of interest of the people. So if there is some channel which is showcasing something genuinely, so automatically viewers will be less.
You're saying, okay, I get it. So yeah, that's one of the problems that
we can't blame directly news channels.
Which is why I said, right? I said that the audience will get the audience will get the news channel that they deserve. Ultimately, there is if there is a but the fact is that if somebody wants to, how would you know when how would you know that there is an alternative if there is no space for that alternative to come up, right? No, if let's say a BBC turned out. Do you know how a BBC operates? BBC in the UK, if you own a TV, you need to pay license fee to the BBC. You need to pay a license fee which goes money for the BBC to operate. So that's a public service broadcaster which is funded by the people. So it will take, it has greater ability to resist instructions from the state or from other financial sources. So when you make a news content show, how do you ensure that news content show, how do you ensure that the audience gets the choice? Like for instance, if a secret, let me take example. Okay, there is a Dabang. It's a massive hit. But along with that, there is a secret superstar. There is a Razi, which is also a hit. So it's not as if the audience want only one particular point of show. At the moment, the audiences don't have choices. If you give them good choices, good quality choices, which are genuine information, which is objective journalism, done well, presented well, I think there will be takers for that as well. No, after, I was saying that 2611 as an example, after 2611, you see until 2611, and I explained that because it was based out of Bombay, they had a logistical advantage, and they were, and they also had, the sense of outrage was greater, and that was a turning point for Times Now. Until then, CNN, IBN, and NDTV were competing for the #1 spot. NDTV was #1, and CNN and IBN was challenging that. Times Now was not able to get the kind of presence that CNN and IBN got. But post 2611, that changed. And slowly what had happened is Times Now realized that they need to position themselves as a right of center news channel, because NDTV and CNN and IBN were both left of center. So they felt that there is a need for a right of center news channel which challenges the Congress, but they started off, as I pointed out to you, on corruption issues. They started off becoming aggressive on 2G scam and corruption, and at that time a lot of people watched Times Now. A lot of people, but slowly, it became like a business model. It started, it's like, you know, I start going right, then I want to go a little more right, I want to go a little more right, I want to go a little more right, finally I fall off the map. You know, and that's what has happened now. So, you know, right, and that's after 2014, the kind of result that came out in the 2014 elections made people realize that, look, you know, there is something that's happening and we are not representing that space. You have a government in power, a central government in power for the first time after Rajiv Gandhi, which has clear majority. And you know, you have that situation where you throw back to the 70s. I mean, how India was in the 70s. You have the Prime Minister who's in complete control. No coalition partner. No one can has any say. And the Prime Minister represents a particular ideology. So when you say times now, when you compare times now to this example, I'm just trying to say that it was a business model to start with. It worked because that was something that did not exist at that point of time. But as I told you, if you go back to 2009 and if you refresh to people who've observed news in 2009, nobody thought Times Now to be right of center at that point of time. They might have argued that, oh, this is not right. You can't do this kind of Pakistan bashing. You can't do this kind of outrage on studio. But nobody said that, you know, this particular news anchor represents this particular ideology. While the right wing, you know, the Twitter on right wing or the BJP had always accused, you know, Barka Dutt, Rajdeep Sardesai, NDTV as left, liberal, secular. You know, they've always targeted them. But there was no right wing face for it. Now, I was just giving you a business model example of how Times Now moved forward. And then things changed. Then you know, you had corporate ownerships taking over. You had the game changer was the 2014 elections, and then things went further. So you will see right now if you're at that extreme right ahead of 2019 and towards as 2019 goes, you might see a further shift, you know, to push the agenda, stretch the limit even further.
Sir, you might have heard about Center for.
We'll collect a few questions together.
Okay.
You answer because there's not much time. Many have questions.
Sir, you might have heard about Center for Media Studies Delhi reports about regarding publications of the news. Means large number of news are coming from. They are based on Delhi itself. It means there are no space for other regions in front pages in all nationalized newspapers. So if you put this. If you take the Karnataka in this regard, so if 1 hour raining in Bengaluru, it will become news in TV channels. So there are in North Karnataka there are other issues like unskilled migration, forest protest for forest reserve in Gadag. So they are not placing in news channels. So here I want to tell you that what is the role of community participation so that they can address their issues through mass media. So another question I want to ask you that nowadays we are seeing the substituting the channels for publication of news. It means few months back I have read in Prajavani newspaper that Indian Express newspaper, it has conducted, it means it has surveyed on evidence. It has conducted a survey, so which is against the government policy. So it was hesitated to publish through this newspaper. Then it approached the Hindu newspaper. Then they published that survey through with some modifications. So here
Which survey is this?
Sir, actually it's I read it few months back, sir. It's happened in 1980s, sir. Just I don't know about what, but
okay.
They have compromised in publication.
I might not be able to comment on it if I don't know which the survey is.
So, like it's against government, not this government, previous government in 1980s.
Okay, okay.
So, if news channels they are hesitating to provide accurate, publish accurate news, then what it may be have potential impact on like public opinion or like in general on society.
Oh, that's what I've been speaking about for the last 1 hour. You know, in terms of
Means
no,
they are
but I get your
substituting,
question.
sir. That's all. That is what my main
Yeah, no,
question
I'll
is.
get it. I get it. You want me to answer that and then take the next one? Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So you were speaking about creating awareness and where regulation is also necessary, but you were speaking on awareness. So in a society which is polarized, and you're trying to create awareness, how is that going to be viewed, since most things are nowadays viewed through the lens of you belonging to the other side? So isn't it a sort of circle? How do we...
Which is why I believe you need a public service broadcaster, which is the only place where people will really begin to trust and turn to. It's a huge issue in terms of creating awareness or even having a sensible dialogue with somebody. You know, it's just impossible. Like, for instance, the other day on WhatsApp, somebody put out saying, you know, put out the faces of all the women candidates in Pakistan, and put out the faces of Mayawati and Mamta Banerjee, and said, think about what would have happened had we all been together. You know, so, you know, basically it was just a bit of a stupid joke that somebody put out. Immediately the response was that that's not fair. India has this one. You know, it'll come down to that. So you can't have, it's not about creating awareness. I think first of all, those who are creating awareness need to, I think the onus is also on those who are creating awareness. The moment you have already declared your side, when you approach somebody, you are not initiating a dialogue, you are starting a lecture down to the other person. So if let's say you want to communicate to somebody, and I still believe, and I can guarantee this to you, that the next election, 2019, is going to be an arithmetic versus chemistry election, where you have all the political parties, all the regional parties together without a potential face, you know, as a prime ministerial face, vis-a-vis a very strong prime ministerial face willing to go alone. So I can still tell you that people, while they do get taken over, while they do get carried away by a particular political ideology or the rhetoric that's been created by it, want substantial information. A farmer is not going to vote if there is serious agrarian distress for a particular party. He is not going to endorse that particular political point of view. There are other extraneous factors that come down. So I think there is still space for a genuine, sensible debate on it. But it has to start from two sides. One, it has to start from those who are, you know, who are starting that debate. They need to first shed their identity of representing a particular ideological point of view, and then the recipient might listen. But now today, because it helps a particular political agenda, think about why this polarization helps. Who does this polarization help? This polarization is not some rabid thing that's happened, right? When you have polarized, who does it help? Why does Rahul Gandhi have to go to a temple in Gujarat? Why does he have to go make a visit to a temple in every part of Gujarat? And why does his party have to call him a Janaudhari Brahmin? That's because you have brought it to a situation that you need to be a Hindu to rule India. You cannot. And that's the result of the polarization that you've faced. Now, is it possible to break that polarization? I think it's possible, but not in the immediate term. You can't break that polarization ahead of 2019. But people will grow out of that polarization. Now, when they grow out of that polarization, do they have a strong alternative? Which is why, at least in my, in my limited, in my pedestrian opinion, I think the need is for a proper public service broadcaster which disseminates news and information in a particular way where it is not tainted by a political ideology. Now, once you have that neutral space, you will begin to start having greater dialogue. I think these biases exist at a subconscious level. What news channels do is they bring it out into the open and they solidify it further. So, it's like you might have a point of view. The moment you get into an argument with me, that point of view only becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. It becomes feeding the egos. Now, this has helped a particular political establishment. So to break that, first there has to be a larger electoral change that might happen, and then there has to be an alternative space which disseminates the middle point, which takes that middle point, and that middle point, the moment that middle point has a large viewership, then you will have, okay, the right will be, the extreme right will be the extreme right, the left will be the extreme left, the moderates will have a conversation. The problem right now is that you don't have a moderate either in the political space or in the electoral space or in the news space. And the news space foments that opinion further. The polarization becomes stronger. And to your question, how do people in community participation? I think there is a lot that has happened in terms of readership engagements, people building pressure through Twitter campaigns. So, like Kathua, Kathua case never really came up. It was purely because a few people started tweeting about it, putting out the horrendousness of the act, that it started getting picked up by national news networks. So I think communities, because of online space, because of social media, communities can play a great role in ensuring news comes out, the truth comes out. Because when you start campaigning on social media and when you start putting substantial information out through social media, I think at some point of time or the other, big media and other news organizations will have to react. They can't constantly ignore it. Yeah, I'm done. I don't. Thanks, guys.